story of Gideon this morning. Gideon was one of the judges in the Old Testament. Judges not as sit behind a courtroom that we think nowadays, but judges as in a judge over the people, a king status, a leader over the people. Gideon was one of the judges. Samson was one of the judges. Deborah was one of the judges. I was trying to pull up names off the top of my head, but the different judges that were leading the people, that were directing the people, that were leading the people that God put in place, because the people said, we need a leader like the rest of the countries, like the other nations, like the other people, even though they had God leading them, they had God directing them, they had God leading them out of Egypt, God leading them out of the place of bondage, the place of slavery where they were, leading them into the promised land, leading them into the place where God was blessing them. But they said, we need kings, we need judges, we need people over us to lead us, to direct us. And God, they're happy with them, but they gave them what they had asked for. Sometimes there's consequences to what you ask for if it's against God's will and God's direction taking place. But God brought leaders in that would lead them and direct them, and at times throughout the Old Testament the people brought leaders in that were against God, but that's a whole nother sermon. I brought Gideon in. Gideon's known for the fleece, putting the fleece out. We'll get to that in a few minutes taking place, but a little history of Gideon. The Midianites were over the Israeli people. They were being taken over. They were in bondage to them, even though they were in their homeland. The Midianites were controlling them with their armies, with the strength of what they had, of what the Midianites' power, the numbers that they had against them, and they would come in and where Israel was and destroy their crops and destroy their water sources and keep them in bondage to what they had, and they weren't able to do anything. They weren't able to gather crops in, so they had more food. They weren't able to get in greater things because they were being controlled by the Midianites. But the other judge before Gideon had passed away, died or got killed, and the Lord comes to Gideon. Gideon's out behind his house, behind his area. He's got wheat he's threshing in the wine press, hiding it in the wine press and threshing it in there to keep it hidden from the Midianites. And God comes in to him, the Lord comes to him and says, "Bless you, Gideon, mighty warrior of God," taking place. And Gideon looks and like, "Mighty warrior of God, I haven't done anything. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't defeated anybody." And Gideon wasn't a mighty warrior, yet he was as a person hiding wheat from the Midianites, hiding behind his house, behind his dwelling place, and threshing it to keep it hidden from them. But God saw not what he was doing. God saw not where he was, but God saw where he was going, where God was taking him, where God was leading him, to the place God was taking him to defeat the Midianites. He called him to defeat the Midianites, defeat the place defeat the people that were over them, defeat what God was doing, defeat what he was doing by God's power and by God's strength. It's being called by God to go out and defeat them, even though they were large in number, even though they were controlling, even though the Midianites were overpowering them. God was calling them and leading Gideon to lead the people, lead the army to defeat the Midianites. So Gideon gathers, little backstory, Gideon gathers the nations that were with them, the nations that were allies to them, gathered them together to gather an army, to gather armies together to go in and defeat the Midianites, to go in and defeat them, to go in and bring their own army against them to defeat the Midianites. But Gideon comes to God, gathering everybody together, gathering everybody in place to come against the Midianites. But then he comes to God. He's got his armies together, he's got his troops together, he's got all the people together to come against this great army of the Midianites that was coming against them, this great number of people that outnumbered them in large numbers to come against them. So Gideon comes to God in Judges 6, verse 36. So Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." I want to cover the first few verses. The sermon came from it, just jumped out on beginning of verse 36. It says, "So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." So Gideon said to God. Sometimes we need to do more than just do a sweet prayer. Lord, bless me. Lord, take care of this. Lord, bless this day. Lord, take care of these things. Lord, I hope this day is good. Thank you for all you've given me. Just a sweet, easy prayer that we want to do. The sweet, easy prayer that we want to take place in. So Gideon said to God. Sometimes we have to say to God, Lord, you've promised this in my life. Lord, you've promised this in my situation. Lord, you've promised to be my healer. Lord, you've promised to be my provider. Lord, you've promised to take care of these things in my life. Lord, you've promised that this would take place in my life. Lord, you've promised these things in my life that I have coming against me, and you've promised to defeat them. But I haven't seen it yet, Lord. Sometimes we need to say to God, remind God of his promises, remind God of his word that he's spoken to us, remind God of what he's done. Not that God has forgotten. God hasn't forgotten for us. But we need to have the faith. We need to stand up and say, in our humanness, in our strength, whatever faith that we have within our hearts, left in our hearts. But God, you've said that this would happen. God, you've said that this would take place. God, that you said that this would happen and this would take place somehow, and I haven't seen it yet. Sometimes we need to say to God what we're feeling. Sometimes we need to say to God what we haven't seen yet. Sometimes we need to say to God in faith that he has promised us, and we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen it take place. We have to say to God and recognize that his hand is still moving, his hand's against us. So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Gideon saying, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Gideon saying to him, you have said this. You have said that you will save Israel by my hand. You have said that you will save Israel through me. I don't understand how it's going to happen. I don't understand how it's going to take place. I don't understand how it's going to come into being. But you have said it, Lord, if you're going to save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Then he asked God for a test. It says to different places, you shall not put your Lord, your God, to the test. As Jesus says to Satan during the temptation. But God also says in Malachi, test me in this. Test me in this. Have faith to do it. Have faith to go forward. So you have to discern on which way testing God. God's faithful. God's leading. You don't want to do it in doubt. But Gideon's asking for a sign to know that God's with him, to know that God's there in his midst, to know that God's with him in his midst. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he arose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung out the dew of the fleece into a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, he said it again to God, he said to God, he didn't that again, but he said to God, he says it a little more, covering a little bit more in this one, but he says, do not be angry with me, but let me speak once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it be dry only on the fleece, but on all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground. So he asked God to prove himself. He asked God to prove his word. He asked God to speak his word. He asked God to physically prove his word so it can be seen, so it can be taken care of, so it can be shown that God's real, that God's moving, that God's hand is there, that God's hand is moving upon us, that God's hand is directing us and leading us and leading his people. He said to God, let there be dew on the fleece only, but be dry on all the ground. And then let it be dew on all the ground, but dry on the fleece only. And God proves himself in those ways in his direction. God proves that his word is true, that he answers prayer, that he directs the steps, that he's leading, that he's doing what he said he would do. And Gideon asked for it in proof. He said, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And then he asked for the tests on the wool being put out. And going on the commentaries, I looked up the commentaries on this. I looked up the reading on the commentaries, and everybody talks about Gideon's weak faith. It talks about Gideon's weak faith that he's putting the fleece out, and talks about Gideon's weak faith that he needed to put a fleece out to see if it was dry or if it was wet taking place, and that God's grace is sufficient, that he let Gideon do this, and that he showed these things to Gideon taking place. But I have problems with it being just didn't feel that it's a doubt of Gideon, that it's a doubt of things taking place, that he wanted proof to see that God was real. He wanted a sign to see that God was real. He wanted a sign to see that God was moving. And yes, our faith isn't as strong always as it should be. Our faith isn't as powerful as it should be sometimes. but God's faithful to move in the midst of us. God's faithful to show his way and his direction. And Gideon was asking these things for God. God, you said these things to me. God, you said that I would defeat the Midianites. You said that I would have this happen. You said that it would take place. You said that it's being done, but I need you to show yourself. I need you to show yourself in the midst of this. I need you to show yourself in the midst of this. I need to see that you are with us. I need to see that you are real. I need to see that your presence is leading us and guiding us. And God's faithful to prove through the fleece that it was wet the one morning and then it was dry the next day. Taking place, God proves himself. God proves his direction. God proves he is faithful. God proves that he is with us. God proves that his power is there and his strength is there in our midst and in our leading of what he has for us and where he's taking us and the power and the presence that he has. And he showed it through the fleece. And he shows it through our situation. He shows it by providing for us in the midst of our struggles. He shows it in the midst of our healing, in the midst of our sickness. He shows it in the midst of his faithfulness when we're unfaithful. He shows it in the midst of whatever's taking place in our lives, that he is faithful and he is with us to answer our prayers, to show that he is powerful, that he is leading, that he is directing us and guiding us and leading us. But he said to God, and God showed himself. Sometimes we need to say these things to God. Say that you are faithful. Say that you're directing. Say that it's being done. Say that it's taking place and guiding us and directing us. Nobody likes the giving part of the sermon, the tithing part of the sermons taking place. But God says, the other one I said about Malachi, God says, test me in this and see if I won't answer you. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. I will open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that you can't contain. But I'm not receiving my I'm not receiving my outpouring. I'm not seeing the pouring out of the windows of heaven and seeing the blessings that I can't contain taking place. But are you bringing the whole tithe into the storehouse? Are you being faithful to what God said? Because God will show himself financially. God will show himself blessing financially. God will show himself blessing in greater ways and greater directions and greater things that he's doing in our midst and in what we have. Stepping out on faith, speaking of stepping out on faith, you'll hear more about it online and on the Facebook page. The situation we have to put a roof on the church here taking place, and with our numbers it would say, you're crazy, you're doing this, you're stepping out on faith doing this, but we're knowing God's going to provide. And God's going to do that. And we've been faithful to God's leading. We've been faithful to what God's doing. And we don't have the abundance to pay for the whole roof yet, but we have doors opening already before we've even signed for it. We have doors opening of blessings that are coming in, that God's doing, that God's moving in our hearts and in our lives. We're going to see God move in that. But we have to be faithful to what God's called us to do. Gideon was faithful to what God was calling him to do. He was calling him to defeat the Midianites. He was calling him to go in and defeat them. And Gideon was faithful. He was gathering the army. He was gathering the troops. He was gathering the weapons to go in. But they told him. So then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. He checks with him with the fleece. And God is faithful to that. And God is faithful to defeat our enemies. Because the backstory of that, I could preach for a couple hours on the whole story of Gideon. It's like 3 chapters going forth. So I'll read it in Judges 6 through 8 later today. But Gideon goes in, gathers his army together, gathers his people together to take place, and God tells him, he goes, gather your torches and gather jars and gather the people together. He goes, and light all your torches, surround the camp of the Midianites. Light your torches and break your jars and yell out loudly over the people. So they did what God said and went out and broke the jars and yelled the army for God and for Gideon. And they broke the jars and yelled and lit up the torches. And God had the Midianite camp run in panic, break out their swords, and go in the midst of panic against their neighbor in the army. And the Midianites defeated themselves by God's strength. Israel didn't have to lift a hand, but God did it by his hand, through his direction, through his power. And they chased the Midianites out of the land, out of this direction, and killed the Midianite leaders on the ground. But God was faithful. God came in not only to have Gideon come in and take place, to gather the army together, but had the camp going in. Oh, that was the other part. Don't trust in your numbers. God is faithful, not worrying about your numbers. Gideon started out with 22,000 troops to come against the Midianites. God says, tell the people, anybody who's afraid to come against the Midianites, anybody who's afraid to go up against them, tell them to return home. So, the beginning of the army actually was bigger than 22,000. It was 32,000 started out with. It said, anybody who's afraid, tell them to go back, tell them to go back home, to not be a part of the army. So 22,000 returned home. That left him with 10,000 troops. God said, you got 10,000 troops, that's still too many. That's still too many troops to come against the Midianites. He said, tell them to get down on the ground and drink from the brook. Tell them to drink from the river that's in front of them. And he said, some will get down on their knees and lap the water like a dog laps the water. And the others will cup the water in their hands and put it to their mouth to drink. So 9,700 got down on their knees to drink like a dog lapping up the water. And 300 put their hand to their mouth to drink the water, to cup it in their mouth to drink. And God says, send the 9,700 home. I'll defeat the Midianites by 300 people. So the great army that was coming against them, the great army that was coming against Israel and trying to keep them in bondage, God said, I will defeat them with 300 people. So he had 300 surround them. He had 300 surround the camp, as I shared with the jars, and put the Midianites into a panic, and they brought the swords against one another on the Midianite camp and killed one another. within the camp, and God defeated them without them having to lift the sword, without them having to run into the camp, without anybody in the Israel camp getting killed. God defeated their enemies. God defeated what was coming against them. And God moved in greater ways than they could imagine. God's able to move in greater ways than we can imagine. God's able to move in greater ways than we expect. God's able to move in greater things that we can imagine taking place. But we have to trust, we have to believe, have the faith to step out. We have to say to God, you've called me to this, you've led me in this, you've directed us in this. But we need to see your hand, we need to see your proof, we need to see this take place, we need to see you moving in greater ways. And God will show himself, God will move in greater ways, God will defeat your enemies without you having to lift a hand. God will defeat what's coming against you, even when it seems impossible. God will move in greater ways than we can even expect, that we can even see, that we can even imagine that God's able to do. Started a church with a few of us with nothing in my hand, going to Wellington, rent a building, minister to come in. But God, I can't do this. But God, I don't have any of the supplies. God, I don't have the money for this. God, I don't have the means for this. God, I don't have anything to be able to do this with. I had to say to God, finally I threw the doubts out there. If I said to God, okay, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know how this is going to take place. I don't know how this is going to show itself. But I'm going to step out in faith. I don't know how it's going to take place, but I need you to do it. Remember saying, I need you to do this. I don't know where it's all coming from, but if you want this, you have to do it. It took that faith. I said to God, one of those wasn't just a sweet comfort prayer. Okay, God, I can start a church. Okay, God, I can figure this out. Okay, God, I don't know how it's going to happen. It was a, okay, God, I'm doing this. I'm stepping out in faith. I don't know how it's going to happen, but you have said for me to do this. You have called for me to do this. You have called and spoken for me to do this. Now you have to show yourself. Now you have to show that this is real. Now that you have to show that this is going to take place. And he revealed himself. And he showed himself. And moved in greater ways. Through starting out, through the finances, through the equipment, through everything that was needed, and then through the building that we're now in, the church building we're now in, that he's providing for. And God's going to continue to provide in greater ways and do greater things in our midst and in our hands and in our leading. To see greater things take place, to see greater miracles take place. Doing the next step of faith, we're going to put a roof on the building. That's the next step of faith, but I'm sure God's not done. God's going to do even greater things than that. He called us to do more than just put a roof on the building and do greater things than that. God's going to continue to move. And we're going to see greater things than that taking place. We're like Nathaniel. Philip and Nathaniel in the Bible sitting under the fig tree. He said, I saw you when you were sitting under the fig tree. And he says, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God. He says, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You'll see greater things than this. You'll see the heavens opened and the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. You thought it was miraculous that God was able to see him where he was laying under the fig tree even though he wasn't there. But Jesus Told him he goes, you're going to see greater things than that. You're going to see heaven open and angels ascending and descending. He saw more than that. He saw lepers healed. He saw blind receive their sight. He saw the dead raised. He saw miracles take place in his life. And he saw Jesus alive again after rising from the dead. He saw greater things than this. We're going to see greater things take place. We just need to trust in him, trust in his leading, and trust in him. But step out in faith. Say to God, you have said this to me. You have called me to do this. You have spoken to me. But I need to see you move. I need to see you move in my midst. I need to see you move in my presence. I need to see you move in the midst of this. And he revealed himself. And God will still reveal himself. God will still show himself. God will still move in our midst and move in our presence and move in the midst of what he's doing, in the midst of what he's saying, in the midst of everything that he's showing, everything that he's leading us in. He's guiding us. He's directing us. Gideon threw a fleece out. It was wet and then it was dry the next day. He saw the signs from God. As for a sign from God, in every little thing, I can't promise that God will make a fleece dry or a fleece wet anymore. He did it for Gideon, but God will show himself in your situation. God will show himself. Just need to be faithful to him. Do what he's called you to do. Do where he's leading you. Do where he's taking you in all that he has for you. And God will reveal himself. God will show himself. As had verses on Moses also, but we'll go with there. I'm not going to mix the two. Gideon's enough to show of what he's doing. What he said. Gideon said to God, speak to God. Let God speak to you. Let God show himself. Let God reveal himself. Let God do greater things. But be faithful to what God's called you to do. Don't just ask for a sign. Don't just ask for a sign and then sit where you are. Don't just ask for a sign and stay where you're at. Don't just ask for a sign and stay comfortable where you're at, but do what God's called you to do. He called Gideon, as I said at the beginning when we went to him, he goes, Gideon, mighty warrior of God, even though he hadn't done it yet. He was calling Gideon to go do this. I shared in Gideon did all the steps to go do this and then asked for God to show himself. You have to agree to walk out and take that step of faith to go farther than you thought you could go, to do bigger things than you thought you could do. And you need God in that. You need God stepping out in that, and sometimes need God to show himself. That's why he showed himself through the fleece. But Gideon stepped out. He stepped out of hiding. He stepped out of his hiding. He stepped out of threshing wheat in the winepress and stepped out and gathered the army, gathered the people together, gathered to come against something bigger than could be defeated on their own. And he went forward, going with that. God's calling you to something bigger. God's calling you to something greater. God's calling you to step out in faith to something bigger than yourself, something bigger than what can imagine. You need to step out in faith and do what he's calling you to do. And then you need, God, I need you to prove yourself. Like I did with the church, like Gideon did with the fleece. God will show himself that he's doing this. God will show himself that he's revealing this. God will show himself that he's doing this, that God's doing this, that God's directing us. It wasn't just hand us a building, because we need a nicer church building than what we had in the rental unit. We need something nicer. We need something greater. But it was also a prayer. We can't do outreach. We can't reach people. We can't help people from this rental unit. We can't help people in this little unit that we're in this rental place. We can't reach people and help people through this. It's where we're at. God, we need you to show himself. That God opened up doors. God did greater things. God did greater things so we could give away toys at Christmas time to children, parents that don't have enough money for toys for their children for Christmas. So we do our toy giveaway at Christmas time. And we just did our closet. We gave away clothes this weekend to people that needed clothes that can't go out and pay the exorbitant prices anymore, even at Walmart, for what they want for a pair of jeans or a shirt anymore, for the prices taking place. But come in and get clothes you need for free for your children, for yourself, to whatever's needed. To be able to do that, to be able to fill out the fellowship hall with things that people need. And God did greater than we can imagine. God did greater than what he did before, and he can still do that, move in that way. He said, God, you've called us to this. God, you've called us to do this. God, you've called me to start Awakening Church. God, you've called me to do that. I stepped out in faith, and God showed himself, and God provided it. God, you've called us to do a toy giveaway, to give away toys, to give away toys to those that are needy, to those who are struggling. And he was faithful to that. Oh, we'll give away clothes. We'll do a clothing closet and give away clothes to people in need. And he's proving himself at that, to be faithful. And God will be faithful to prove himself. What's being done, he'll defeat the enemies that are in our way. And he'll defeat it by the few or by the many, going forth of what God's able to do, what God's faithful to do, what God's able to show himself in. So trust in God, step out in faith, to do what he's called you to do, and let him show himself, let him reveal himself to you, and trust that he will provide, that he will lead. And say to God, while you're in the midst of this, God, I need you to see you in this. God, I need you to see you in this situation, and watch for him to reveal himself, because he will. And he'll reveal himself in greater ways than you can imagine. If you're watching online, if you're here this morning watching online, you've been struggling in your world, you've been struggling in addictions, you've been struggling in your problems, you've been struggling in everything in your life, and you're trying to defeat your enemies on your own, you're trying to defeat your enemies on your own, you're trying to defeat your enemies in the midst, your enemies of struggles, your enemies of struggles in your life, your enemies of addictions, your enemies of problems in your life, and you're trying to solve it on your own. You're trying to come against these armies under your own strength. They won't be defeated. But through God's strength, they can be. You can't come to God boldly for this, but God will be faithful to his word. So we can come before God, go, God, you have said, if I come to you asking forgiveness, you will forgive me. If I come to you and lay my sins at your feet, lay my sins at the foot of the cross, you're faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness in the Bible. He's faithful to cleanse us and forgive us and give us a new life. He's faithful to love us and direct us. He's faithful to forgive us and cleanse us and give us a new life. And we're able to come before the Lord with that truth, with that direction, and He's faithful to provide on that. So if you never asked the Lord into your heart, you can do that this morning. He's faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Receive Him, you watching or here, receive Him into your heart this morning, into your life. Pray along with me if you want to do that. Dear Lord, you are faithful, you are just. You have said that if I come to you, if I accept you into my heart, if I come to the cross and lay my sins there, you are faithful to forgive me of my sins and cleanse me and bring me into a new life with you. I ask that this morning. I ask you to come into my heart, come into my life. I believe you died on a cross to forgive me, to cleanse me of all my sins, be the perfect sacrifice, and rose from the dead so I can have eternal life with you. I lay my sins at the foot of the cross this morning. I ask you to forgive me of my sins and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness. Come into my heart. Come into my life. Change me, lead me, direct me. I'm trusting in the word that you have said, that it is true, that I am forgiven, I am cleansed through you dying on the cross and rising from the dead so I can have eternal life. I receive that this morning. I ask that to be cleansed this morning, to be forgiven, and come into my heart, come into my life, and direct me in the way you're leading me, in the place that you have for me. Forgive me of my sins, cleanse me, and direct me into the new life that you have for me. I ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. If you prayed that with me this morning, He's giving you new life. He's faithful to His word. He's faithful to what He has said. And He's forgiving you and come into your heart. If you prayed that and meant it this morning, if you prayed that and meant it, contact me. I'd love to celebrate with you. All my info is at the top of the Facebook page. We'll give a Bible to you if you don't have one. And love to pray with you and celebrate with you. Come and join us for we have Bible study on Friday evenings. Come and join us for that. We have a light meal at 6 and Bible study at 7. So come and join us, be part of that. Love to have you be part of that with us. And I say if you're coming from work, we have the light meal at 6. So come be part of that with us. We're started a couple weeks ago on the Chosen series, season 1. Those of you that watch that, there's a Bible study that goes along with it. So we watch it the 1 week and discuss it the following. So come be a part of that with us. To be part of that, and come join us for a service on Sunday morning. We're at 212 West Herrick Avenue in Wellington, Ohio. The service times are at 10 a.m. on Sundays. So come and join us for a service. Have a great week, and God bless.